And welcome back to the B&H virtual event space. As you can see, we're both out in nature today. Anne's got a beautiful, dreamy, botanical backdrop. Mine's just your typical cliche Central Park photo. So I'm going to be learning along with you guys today. Thank you to our sponsor, Lensbaby, for providing us a different approach to flower photography. So we're going to be looking at some botanical stuff. I'm guessing some macro-ish kind of stuff. All right. She's giving me the nod. I'm like, all right, I'll keep rolling with that. But, and such a pleasure to have you on. We also have hanging out in the background there, Laura from Lensbaby, who, if you have any question on any of the products, which you should, if you are paying attention today, you should have questions on the Lensbaby line of lenses. Because it is wildly different from anything you have used. I guarantee you that, unless you have used their products before. But for those of you who are in the market for something new, something different, trying to step outside the box and get more creative with your photos, this is it. I feel like I've done way too much talking already, so it's time to bring in the real talent of the hour, Anne Belmont. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right away because I'd rather you see my work than me. So thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you to B&H for making this possible, and to Lensbaby for sponsoring me, and to Laura Evans, who is a dear friend of mine, to being here, helping to field all those questions that we're going to get. And of course, I'm going to be answering them too. And as people who know me know that I always give my email at the end. And if you have questions, I welcome them. I help people with Lensbaby questions, flower photography questions every day of the week. So I'm going to start my presentation. I've got a full program. It is jam-packed with information. I really want you to come away from this hour understanding these lenses and how they work and how they really can add to your creativity and for bringing emotion into your work, because that's a huge part of what I do. So let's get started. I want to start by telling you that I'm going to just take a few minutes in the beginning of the presentation to really explain my approach to photography and how these lenses really match perfectly with the way that I practice my photography and how I teach my photography. So I think that'll become very clear to you as you hear me express these ideas. So it's also important to know that, yes, this is a lot about flowers. I love flowers. I do most of my photography at Chicago Botanic Garden. I'm from the Chicago area. I live 10 minutes from this amazing garden. And so yes, I have many, many flowers at my footsteps. But I also photograph anything in nature, and I'm equally entranced by plant life, ferns, succulents, all sorts of things. So you'll see a variety of things in my work. All right, I want to start by talking a little bit about my goals as an educator, because my goals as an educator really match perfectly with not only what I like to teach you, but how I practice my photography personally. So I want to help you to see more deeply. I think this is really important to learning to find subjects that have impact, that can bring emotion into your work, but it takes time. It takes a slow and mindful approach to really look for this magic that's in nature. And it's there, I promise you. You just have to really look for it. I also want to teach you to unleash your creativity. I studied creativity in depth during my graduate studies in art therapy. And I'm very interested in how creativity emerges in children and then tends to go a little bit underground in adulthood or even in later childhood. Children at age 3, 4, and 5 are really at their peak in creativity. And then it begins to diminish. But we all have that creative potential, and we can bring it back from that underground. We just need to bring it back and let it blossom again. So I have lots of ideas about that I'm going to share with you. And of course, Lensbabies are the perfect lenses to really help you unleash that creativity. And then I also want to help you bring more of your authentic self to your work and to begin to photograph from your heart. This is front and center with my photography. My background as an art therapist really frames the way that I see my photography and also the way that I teach photography. I believe very deeply that art has the power to be therapeutic, to heal us, and to help us better understand our emotions and our inner selves. And so this is a huge part of the way that I approach my work. And I will say quite honestly that has become even more important to me during this last 9 months with the pandemic. I know that we've all been through a really rough time. We've experienced a tremendous sense of loss, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And my art, my getting out with my camera every day, and I've kind of rediscovered my neighborhood over the last 9 months and even my yard. And that has really helped to center me. It has become more important to keeping me sane during this time. So I hope you can take some of that and use that, because we're not through this yet. We're still in a very difficult time. So I think you'll see that very clearly with my work. So I have a fascination with seeing the world up close. As Derek said, he thinks this is a bit about macro photography. Yes, it definitely is. This really comes from my childhood. I was a child who grew up in a small town. I was surrounded by beautiful places. I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I developed a very deep love of nature very early on. I was a child that was content to sit in a tree, to play in the woods, or to be out collecting rocks. I was a collector of natural things, and it's where my fascination for textures and patterns came from. So this really translates from my past, what I call my emotional roadmap, to what I do today. And that's why I'm fascinated with macro photography. So whether I'm trying to bring the early morning dew of a dahlia to your eyes, or the fascinating center of a clematis flower, or perhaps a softer version of a dahlia. This happens to be called the Sweet Dreams Dahlia, which I think is a perfect name for this flower. And of course, photographing it with this particular lens really brings that story forward. Or these beautiful Japanese beauty berries. These emerge in October in our area, and it's a very ordinary looking bush during most times of the year, but in October they just burst with these beautiful purple berries, and they're very tiny, so they're easily missed. So this is why we need to slow down and really look for this magic, because it is there, believe me. I find it every day when I'm out in nature. I might be interested in showing you the backs of flowers. I love to photograph flowers from all different angles, and the backs continually fascinate me. Their beautiful detail, their graceful lines, the sense of movement in the back of a flower. So I never limit myself in terms of how I see a flower. Or I might want to bring to you a more abstract vision. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, because again, these lenses are perfect for this kind of photography. So in the case of the dahlia at the top, this is a cafe au lait dahlia, one of my favorite dahlias. And what I'm trying to capture here is just the beautiful way that the light brings out those tones of color within that flower in a very abstract way. Or the other dahlia, just that simple, beautiful, sensuous line of the flower within. I'm just trying to lead your eye to that one more abstract quality. So we'll talk about that, how that's one of the beautiful things about these lenses. So these lenses help me connect emotionally with my subject and photograph in a way that expresses that emotion. And you've already heard how my background as an art therapist, this is very important to me. When I look through these lenses, sometimes I'm just filled with emotion at what I'm seeing, the beautiful blur, the way the colors rendered and the light falls on the subject. these lenses really help bring that emotion forward. And this is another example of how that blur, the color and the light just really brings that sense of emotion. This was an image that was very early after I got the Lensbaby, the Velvet 56. This was in 2015. And for any of you who might be joining me from the Chicago area who have visited the Chicago Botanic Garden, we have a dahlia show every year. And the dahlia show, it's very interesting. They have dahlias lined up on tables. It's not the most ideal circumstances. My love is really photographing out in nature, because that's actually part of the therapy for me too, is just being outdoors and in nature. But these dahlias are prize-winning dahlias, and they are absolutely gorgeous, and you can't pass up this opportunity. But it's difficult circumstances to photograph them in, and mostly because the lighting is absolutely terrible. Well, I got this image home, and again, this was a very early image with that lens. I was still really getting to know it. And I teared up when I got it on my computer screen. I just got very emotional. I said, how did this lens do this? Where did that light come? It just felt like it was lit up. And the color and the background, I still don't understand where that background came from, but it captured something that was so powerful to me. And this is where I truly fell in love with this lens. And this love affair has never stopped. It's just gotten stronger. So these lenses help me shoot what it feels like. I love this quote. I don't like to use a lot of quotes in my presentations. I like to give you my words, but I love this quote from David Allen Harvey. Don't shoot what it looks like, shoot what it feels like. And again, this is the basis of my work. And let me explain this a little bit more by saying that I believe that we come to the world with a view that is a culmination of everything we've experienced in our life. So every loss, every joy, every love, every relationship you've experienced, every trip you've taken, down to the little things like the music you listen to, the books you read, the movies you watch, it all feeds in to the way that you personally and uniquely see the world. And we all do this differently. We all see the world differently. And when we can funnel that through the lens of our camera, we're bringing a real richness to our work and a meaningfulness. You're bringing your authentic self. So this is examining my personal history. I've already told you where my love of nature comes from, how my art therapy background influences my photography. And there's more that I'll talk about as we go. But I think examining your personal history is really important to understanding why you photograph in the way that you do. So these particular images, I'd like to just talk about what they feel like for me. So the fern on the left was shot in a conservatory setting in a big fern room. When you walk into this room, your lenses fog up. It's misty, it's warm. It feels like you've stepped back in some primeval rainforest. And I shot this with the Lensbaby Velvet 56, wide open at 1.6. It's very soft, very ethereal. But to me, I look at that image. This was shot 5 years ago. I can feel what it feels like to be in that fern room, to step into that fern room. The image in the middle was taken very recently, just about 3 weeks ago, right before the dahlia season was finished. And I met the most wonderful friend in September, and I think she's in the audience. And I just want to say hi, Karen, if you're here, Karen. Karen lives in my neighborhood, but I had never met her. She lives about 4 blocks away. And during my neighborhood walks during the pandemic, I ended up in front of her house, and she has the most magnificent dahlia garden I've ever seen in my life. And I had the opportunity to meet her that day as I'm standing there with my mouth open. And we became fast friends. We became really close friends. She loves to grow dahlias. I love to photograph them. And I've gone back to her garden many, many times. And each time I go, she sends me home with a bundle of dahlias to photograph at home. And this Cafe au Lait dahlia was one of those. So I brought this home and I photographed it in natural light. And as I put it up on my computer screen, I immediately heard myself say the words, the wedding dress. There was a sense of elegance and grace in this flower and the beautiful blur created by this is shot with the Sweet 35 optic in the Composer Pro. The beautiful blur it just brought forth this vision of a wedding dress. And I realized that there was emotion behind that for me because it represented my daughter's wedding dress, which is sitting in her closet. She was supposed to be married in August in Denmark, and the wedding had to be postponed because of COVID. It will happen, and she will wear that dress. But this is a sweet reminder to me of how beautiful she looks in that dress. And the tulips on the right were taken about a week before shelter in place happened here in Chicago. I was at Garfield Park Conservatory, which is the same conservatory where the fern was photographed. They have this fantastic spring flower show. And I saw this little grouping of tulips, and immediately a story emerged for me. I saw it as a little family. I saw it as my family, including my granddaughter. And my family all lives far away. So during this time, I was feeling a lot of anxiety and when am I going to see my family again? When am I going to be able to travel? But this image became very comforting to me because it symbolized them huddled, I call this snuggled up, them snuggled up together at home during the pandemic. And that's one of the lovely things that has happened in the pandemic. I do try to find good and joy in even the most adverse of times. And this image helped me see that. So this is what it means to shoot what it feels like. And you'll see this, time and again in my work. So Lensbabies are the perfect lenses to help me bring those stories and those emotions that emerge from my subjects. So this one I call Give Yourself a Hug. And this was created in April during the pandemic. And I realized that the reason this image resonated with me is that it reminded me of wrapping my arms around myself and giving myself a hug and saying, take care of yourself. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. But again, this was an image that, it just took on a very powerful therapeutic meaning for me. This is another one created during the pandemic. This is from my front yard. I discovered my front yard. I had never photographed the ferns in my front yard before, but when the garden's closed and you can't go, then you have to find other ways to photograph. So I saw these two huddled together and immediately a title emerged. And I often do title my work in the field because I feel it's an important part of helping me to compose the subject to bring that story forward. So I call this We're in This Together, which is what, I think we were all kind of feeling that need to support each other. The other thing that was going on during this time that was very important and kind of symbolizes this image for me is that a photography group that I work with called Out of Chicago was putting on our first online conference in April, and we brought together 70 of the world's best photographers. We had 850 some people that attended. B&H was our sponsor for this wonderful conference. It was just an amazing 4 days of people being inspired, supporting each other, learning. We had cocktail parties on Zoom, and it just brought the photography community together in a way that this image really symbolized for me. So this one I call The Family. And this was created about an hour after I had dropped my daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter off at the airport. And I was feeling a little sad saying goodbye to them. We'd had this wonderful visit here in Chicago. And I went to the garden, as I often do, right after I got home from the airport, just to feel better, because that's what always makes me feel better, is to get out with my camera. And this was the first little scene that I saw. I walked into the first garden. I wanted to see what the dahlias were looking like. And here was this little family with their backs turned as if they were leaving. And my granddaughter right in the middle, as she always is. So this image was very comforting to me. So you'll often hear me refer to my images as tiny dancers or ballerinas or just dancers, because they evoke that sense of grace and movement. Now, this is another piece of my personal history that I bring to my photography. As a child, I was exposed to the arts. I dabbled in a lot of the visual arts. I got my first camera when I was 10 years old and started that lifelong love. And I also took ballet quite seriously. And I think when you study any kind of dance or any physical activity, it becomes a part of who you are and a part of your muscle memory. I can still remember what it feels like to do the movements of ballet, to point my toes, to maybe my body won't do it in the same way as I did, many, many years ago, but that still is with me in my memory. And so I project that into my subjects. So again, this is taking that personal history and understanding why we're attracted to photographing the things that we love and the way that we see them. So another thing that I love about these lenses is that they encourage play, experimentation, and taking risks. And these are three very important qualities to bringing creativity forward. I feel this so strongly, so deeply, that we have to play, we have to experiment, and we have to be willing to make mistakes, because not everything's going to work. That's how we learn. So these two images represent times when I stepped out of my comfort zone, stepped out of that box, and tried something new with a Lensbaby. These are both flowers, cactus flowers and lotus flowers, that I traditionally only photographed in very high apertures. I wanted you to see every single detail of these flowers, every little pop, every petal. And so I was shooting these in apertures f/16 all the way to f/32. But I think when you shoot something in the same way over and over again, you kind of hit that creative rut and you get stuck and you feel like you got to try something different. And so I said, I'm not sure this is going to work for these flowers. I just couldn't quite visualize it, but I'm willing to take that risk. I'm willing to make that mistake. I might go home with nothing. But again, these lenses really help me step out of that comfort zone and try doing things in different ways. I know that not everyone's going to like these images. I actually got some criticism for the cactus flowers. People said, "Oh, I much prefer your flowers fully in focus." But you know what? I shoot these things for myself. And I think that's really important, that if it brings you joy, if you enjoy it, don't worry what other people are going to say, because you're going to get that criticism when you use these softer focus lenses. And that's okay. So experimentation, it is an essential part of creativity. If you've worked with me at a workshop or at a conference or in the field, you know that I'm going to tell you, stay with your subject, work your subject, shoot it from different angles, different compositions, different apertures, different lenses, just really explore it fully. I spend an hour, 2 hours, I've even been known to spend 6 hours with the same flower. It may not be in the same day. I may go back and try it again, but I believe that that's where creativity emerges. It leads to discovery and it opens up new ways of seeing. So the image on the top is a more traditional view of a tulip that's shot with the Velvet 56. And I don't normally photograph tulips that way because I think it gets a little overdone, but look at the patterning and look at the color. How could I not photograph it? And then, eventually I ended up down on the ground up under this flower. I didn't see what was going on in the background when I was above it, but on the, when I was on the ground and looking at it from that angle, I saw all this color emerge. And I was like, whoa, okay, now we're going to do a little experiment. So I happened to have quite a few Lensbabies in my bag that day. And so I took probably a good hour just with this flower, with this composition, and tested out. I wanted to know, okay, which one of these lenses is going to give me the most beautiful background? So I tried my Velvets, I tried my Composer Pro with a number of optics, and this one I ended up with the Sol 45, which created, just in my view, the most stunning background straight out of camera. So, but I never would have gotten to this point had I not stayed with this subject. Lensbabies also really encouraged me to explore in the abstract, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is a way that I dearly, dearly love to photograph. I love to look into my flowers. I don't necessarily see flowers as a whole. I really look into them, and I want to see the interesting details, the lines, the sensuous curves, the patterns, the shapes, the way the light's falling on them. And these can become subjects in their own right. And again, these lenses do this perfectly. You can certainly use a more traditional macro lenses to get some of these effects, but I think, Lensbabies are certainly the ones that I reach for when I'm doing more abstract photography. I find this very exciting and very creative, and everybody's going to see their subject in a slightly different way. So you might be photographing the same subject, but come up with a very different way of approaching it. So I call this selective focus. So what I'm trying to do with this selective focus, or this more abstract way of photographing, is draw your eye just to one part of the image. In the case of the chrysanthemums, it's those little funky dancing petals. There's just maybe 4 of them that are in focus. And then with this costus plant, yes, I did experiment with this with a range of apertures, but I loved these are both shot with the Sol 45. I loved what the Sol did with the selective focus of just drawing your eye to that one petal where it's attached to the stem, that interesting shape, the pop of color. You still see that beautiful line, the beautiful curve that costus plant gives, but it doesn't have to be in focus for you to understand that. And that selective focus really draws the eye exactly where I want you to take it. So this really encourages me to push those boundaries between what's in focus and what's not. And again, it's a very fun and freeing way to photograph. All right, we are going to jump into talking specifically about Lensbabies. I just want to tell you some general thoughts about all of these lenses before I get into the specific ones. So these are manual focus, manual aperture lenses. So you focus the lens by turning the focus ring on the barrel of the lens. You can't use autofocus with these lenses. It doesn't work. You're also going to set the aperture on the aperture ring of the lens. You're not going to do it in your camera. These lenses do not connect electronically with the camera. So the metadata that you take into Lightroom or wherever you process your images is not going to show your aperture, and it's not going to show you the lens that you shot with. So don't be alarmed by that. That's just the way it is. So we can get around that, or we can just not be concerned about it because, I have a lot of experience with these lenses. I can usually look at my images and pretty much ballpark tell you what aperture I shot them in. And really, it's only important to me in terms of teaching purposes. So I don't really worry about that. Now, in terms of the lens that I use, that is important to me because I shoot with so many different Lensbabies, and it can become confusing to keep them straight. When I get everything in Lightroom, like, is that the Sol? Is that the Velvet? And yes, sometimes it's very apparent, but sometimes it's very subtle and not so apparent. So I solve that by, I carry index cards in my backpack with the name of each lens, each optic that I use. And I just take a picture of that before I begin photographing with that lens. And then in Lightroom, I know that everything beyond that that point was done with that particular lens, and it really simplifies my life a lot. I don't have to do any guessing. So with some camera brands, you're going to need to go into your menu and shoot select without a lens. This is not all that many cameras, and I can't even tell you the exact, Laura may know this more than I do, but I just know that I get emails all the time. I've attached the lens and my shutter won't release. So what's wrong? I think the lens is broken. And I said, well, go into your camera menu and see if you have that setting and change that. And then voila, it works. The lens works. So it may or may not be an issue with your particular camera, but just be aware that that might happen. Depending upon your camera brand and your preference, you're going to either be shooting in aperture priority or manual mode. Now, I previously shot with a Canon camera, and I can use both aperture and manual. I personally prefer aperture priority. It's just the way my brain is wired, but I now shoot with a Sony mirrorless, and I can shoot with either. But again, I like aperture priority, but many cameras you can only shoot in manual. So every once in a while, I switch over to manual just to kind of refresh my memory, because I'm often teaching people and I want to know, I want to be able to help them know how to balance that exposure triangle and get a good exposure. So, all right, we're going to dive in and start talking about the Velvet lenses today. First, there is the Velvet 56, which came out in 2015, the Velvet 85, which came out in 2017, and then the Velvet 28 is the newest of the babies. It came out in April of this year, so it's a brand new lens. So I have the aperture range listed at the bottom and the camera mounts that these are available in. So we're going to talk about them individually and talk about how these lenses work, because there is a learning curve, and I want you to be successful with these lenses. All right. This is a comparison to show you the different focal lengths. And I actually created this for Laura because she's working on a project for Lensbaby. And I hope you don't mind that I use this, Laura, but I think it just gives a great visual of the different focal lengths. Now this, keep in mind, was photographed on a full frame camera and on a tripod. So I didn't move my position, but you can see what it looks like to have that wonderful wide view with the 28 millimeter. And the 56 and the 85 get you in much closer. So what makes these lenses special? Well, the Velvet creates this beautiful ethereal glow in the lower aperture. So when you shoot this lens, any of these three lenses, in wide open up to about f4, you're going to get this beautiful ethereal glow. Once you get past f4, that glow has pretty much gone. You'll have beautiful softness, but the glow is really in those lower apertures. Now, I've had a lot of people, a lot of naysayers who have emailed me and said, I don't need to buy these lenses. I can do this in post-processing, and they try to get into an argument with me. And, I said, okay, try, but I don't think you can. I really, I have experimented with this to see if I can get the look of that glow with a traditional macro lens. And yes, you can get close. There's filters and things that you can use, but it is really unique to this lens. And it is why I dearly love this lens, because it is that beautiful ethereal glow that again brings so much emotion to an image. So this gives you a visual of how the effective aperture works with the Velvets. I think this is one of the most confusing things, and this is something that I get a lot of questions about. People email me and they say, I just can't get my images sharp. And then I ask them, well, what aperture are you shooting at? And they're trying to shoot absolutely wide open. And yes, it's going to look soft. So look at, these are shot again on my full frame camera with the Velvet 85. Look at the glow, the intensity of the glow and the softness in f1.8. It's very intense. Now think of this as an overlay. Underneath that overlay it is actually sharp. I promise you, it is sharp under there, but the glow makes it appear soft. So some people like this and some people are very uncomfortable with it. If you look at what happens at f2.8, look at how much more sharpness there is in that sweet spot in the center. It's becoming more sharp. You still have the glow. You still have beautiful softness around the edges, but a little more sharpness is beginning to appear. At f4, that progress continues. More sharpness in the center, that sweet spot's getting bigger. The glow is beginning to lessen. It's still there at f4. And beautiful softness. You can see the backgrounds in all these images are really, really beautiful. And then at f16, you can, or not f16, f5.6, you can see the much more sharpness, and the glow has disappeared at this point. You're still getting the softness around the edges, but a much more sharp image. So this makes these lenses very versatile. As I say, some people are comfortable with a lot of glow and others like more sharpness. F4 is a very popular aperture, especially for people beginning with Lensbabies, because they just kind of want a little bit more in focus. Now, I will tell you that with time, you may change your mind about that. I love shooting wide open, and I've totally embraced that. But when I first started with Lensbaby, that's how I felt. F4 just felt very comfortable to me. So experiment with that aperture to see what you like and what works best with the subject that you're shooting. So I also will talk a little later on about where you should be doing your focusing. You should not be doing your focusing at f1.8 because it's really going to be hard to see that image in focus. It's much better to do your focusing at f4 or f5.6, and I'll reiterate that later. So vary the amount of glow depending on your subject and the mood and the emotion that you want to create. Here you can see the f2 has quite a bit of glow, whereas the f5.6 is much sharper, but still maintains some of that softness around the edge. Here's some images shot in those lower apertures. You saw the fern before. That's wide open with the Velvet 56. And then f2.8 with the Velvet 85. You're getting a little bit more sharpness, but still just, again, that beautiful, beautiful glow. And when you get into those higher apertures, then you get a lot more sharpness. So the succulent on the left, f5.6, I'm amazed at how much sharpness I got in that. I still have some nice softness around the edges, and I personally like that. My images are almost never about being sharp from corner to corner. I like that softness. I think it helps guide the eye into where I want you to look. At f8, even more sharpness. Now, 5 years ago, I might have said, okay, let's change over to our regular macro lens to shoot this Senia, to bring all that beautiful detail to sharpness. But I don't know if it's laziness or just that I realize I can do this with my velvets. I just need to up the aperture. The higher that aperture goes, the more sharpness you're going to get. So it makes these lenses very versatile. Here's a dahlia. I absolutely love dahlia curls. And, again, just enough to get everything in focus that I want to draw the eye to, but yet a beautiful softness. All right, let's talk a little about the individual velvet lenses. So the Velvet 56 focuses as close as 5 inches. When this came out in 2015, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was so excited because I love getting close to my subjects, and I thought, this is perfect. I've got a macro lens and I can have these beautiful effects. So it was really exciting to me to be able to shoot this close and yet have this wonderful versatile lens. So the Velvet 56 is a great choice for either crop sensor or full frame cameras. And especially if you like to shoot your subject close, then it works well. Now, if you shoot with crop sensor, this is the lens I'm going to recommend to you. I get this question almost every day, which should I get? And my first question is, what camera do you shoot with? Again, crop sensor, this is the lens. Now, I won't tell you absolutely don't buy the 85. I know people that shoot with that lens on a crop sensor. You will probably lose some of the effect, but it will work. It'll still work, even though it's really built for full frame cameras. But the 56 on a crop sensor camera or a micro four thirds is going to give you a very similar feel and result to the 85. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to make a decision about what is the best fit for you and for your style of shooting. The Velvet 85 focuses at 9.5 inches, so you can't get in quite as close. Now, that's a little deceiving because when you're shooting with a longer focal length, 85, it's going to cause some compression. It's going to fill that frame a little bit more. So it's not quite as big a difference as you might think. But again, this lens is really best suited and built for full frame cameras. So what this lens really taught me to do, and I beta tested this for Lensbaby, and I thought, oh, nothing could ever replace my 56. I know I'm not going to like this lens as much, but it's actually probably my favorite of the three lenses because I shoot full frame, but what it does to backgrounds is just spectacular. It just creates this beautiful, beautiful background. So this is a lens that really taught me to pull back a little and include more background. Now, if I only have a choice of taking one lens with me, if I'm traveling or if I'm in a situation where I don't want to take a lot of gear, I usually take my Velvet 85 and I throw in my extension tubes because this can get me closer. So with a 20 millimeter extension tube, I'm probably just about as close as I would be with a Velvet 56. So that's always an option. If you choose the Velvet 85, but you still want to get in closer, is use extension tubes. Now, if you're not familiar with what extension tubes are, they are tubes, hollow tubes that they do connect. You want to make sure you get the ones that connect electronically, although actually with the Lensbaby, it doesn't matter. But I use these tubes with all of my lenses. So, and B&H can certainly help you find the right brand that fits with your camera. I own Kenko and really love them. They come in these three sizes, the 12 millimeter, the 20 millimeter, and the 36. These go between your camera and your lens, and they help you get closer. They just bring you in closer to your subject and allow you to get a more macro-like view. You can also use a close-up filter. You just need to make sure that you get the right size thread for the lens that you're using it on. So with the Velvet 56, you would want a 62 millimeter thread. With the Velvet 85 or the 28, a 67. So these are options to get you in closer. So as I mentioned, the Velvet 85 just creates beautiful background blur. When I started shooting with this lens, I was just floored with what I was getting straight out of camera. That tulip was actually shot when I was beta testing the lens. And I got that on my computer screen and I said, whoa, it's like a watercolor painting straight out of camera. How did that happen? That's what the lens does. So it's really special. But again, if you have a crop sensor camera, it's going to function very close to that with your camera, a 56 will. All right, the Velvet 28. This is just a brilliant lens because what Lensbaby has done here is they've created a lens that is wonderful for landscape. It's wonderful for urban shooting. It's a great travel lens, but it also has the capability of focusing at 2 inches. And I think that's remarkable to have a landscape lens that can get that close to your subject. Now, keep in mind that this magnolia that I'm showing you is a large flower, so it's filling the frame. When I'm trying to shoot with a Velvet 28 and I'm shooting a smaller flower, I'm going to still have a lot of background showing. So in my mind, for what I do, this does not replace my other lenses. But it's a wonderful addition because I can go, you know, I I help run landscape conferences all over the country. And this is a perfect lens. I can be taking a landscape shot and then turn around and photograph something in macro. So it's a wonderful combination of the best of both worlds. Now this lens also goes to an aperture of f/22, and it is super sharp at those higher apertures. So unlike the 56 or the 85, you will get corner to corner sharpness. You will not be able to tell that you're shooting with a Velvet, but then you also have this wonderful opportunity to shoot with this glow when you use it in the lower aperture. So very versatile lens with just a lot of possibilities. Here's another image that I shot close up, and you'll see in a minute a landscape that I did with this lens too. So magical garden scenes and landscapes. I love using these lenses to create these kind of fairy tale like garden scenes or wooded scenes or landscapes. They're really fun and they're very easy to do, which is it's almost like you're cheating, because you basically set the camera at infinity and then choose your aperture, and that's it. Unless you're a little closer, and then it might not quite be at infinity, but they're very fun to use for landscapes. Now, in these images, the Velvet 85 is seen from Acadia National Park. I love the little bit of compression that it created. And then here with the 28, this is a kind of a cramped little space, and I could never shoot this scene with either my 56 or my 85, but the 28 really allowed me to get that whole scene in. I'm shooting probably about f/2 with these. I encourage you to experiment with a range of apertures and see where it feels right to you, but I usually want just a not total glow, but just enough to give it that kind of magical fairy tale look. Here's another image. This is with the Velvet 56, which is again a wonderful focal length on a full frame camera for this kind of a landscape shot. And this again probably around f/2, because that's usually where I am. All right. Now we're going to move on from the Velvets and talk about the Sol 45. And you're going to hear me really gush about this lens because I love it. This lens was, and I have to be very honest with you, when I first got this lens from Lensbaby, I thought, no, I don't think I'm going to like this one. This doesn't really fit with my way of shooting. This is a fixed aperture lens. You can only shoot it in f/3.5, and I'm all about aperture. So I thought, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But about 30 minutes after having this on my camera, I realized the potential of this lens, and I really started to fall in love. Some of my favorite images come from this little powerhouse of a lens. So the Sol 45 is built for DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. The Sol 22 is for micro four thirds. This is a lens that tilts. It's a very gentle tilt. It's very easy to use, and I'll explain how all that works. And then in the center image, what you see are the bokeh blades, and I'll explain what these do and what they mean. These can be engaged in front of the lens, or they can be pulled back and just used, without the bokeh blades. So really fun, really lightweight, wonderful creative lens, and it's very inexpensive. So this is a great place to start with Lensbaby. I usually, as people that love flower photography, I usually either recommend this lens or the Velvet. It's great places to start. But of course, I'm going to ask you a series of questions as to how you shoot, what you like to shoot, before I would give you that recommendation. But it is a wonderful lens. Now, if you want to get in close, you're going to need to have macro filters. And these are also a Lensbaby product. They come in a set of 3, a +1, a +2, and a +4. And you can stack these all together, or you can use them separately. In this Dahlia image, I've stacked 3 together to get this close. The Sol 45 focuses at 14 inches, so you can't get really close to your subject unless you have these macro filters. The Sol 22 is at 3.5 inches, so you can get closer with that lens, but I think, I don't have experience in shooting with a micro four thirds lens with this or micro four thirds camera with this lens, but I think you're still going to need macro filters to really get in close with your subject. You could alternatively use extension tubes but I've had mixed results with them. I find sometimes that when I tilt, I get a bit of a vignette. So I prefer the macro filters, and then I can add them and subtract them as I need to based on how close I am to my subject. So they work really, really well with this lens. All right, so this is what happens when you engage those bokeh blades, those funky little blades. You need to pull back and include more background to create this kind of texture, these lines in your background. If you're too close to your subject, it's going to get lost in the subject and you're not going to see it. So pull back, include more background, and ideally that background should be a little bit further back. That's going to create even more texture. So this is an image shot with the bokeh blades engaged, and you see, oh, and you can also swivel them so that you can change the direction of that texture. Very creative, very fun, and just, you know, again, really encouraging of experimenting and playing. Now, if you don't like that look, if that's not your so-called cup of tea, then you can just push them back and embrace the smooth, creamy blur. I think this lens creates some of the most beautiful backgrounds I have ever seen in any lens and any Lensbaby. I just think it's really outstanding. So this is without the bokeh blades. I've moved in a little closer in this image because I wasn't worried about getting that texture. So that fixed aperture at 3.5 means that you have to be pretty accurate in your focus. You need to really think critically about, what do I have to have in focus? Because this lens may not work with all subjects. You also need to make sure that you're really parallel to your subject to get as much in that plane of focus. I was actually surprised, this is from my friend Karen's garden, that I was able to get as much of this dahlia in focus with that lens. It happened to be the only lens I had with me that day when I met her. And I love this image. I love the beautiful blur, but that shallow depth of field, again, means that you have to be accurate. I recommend that when you start with this lens, you start by center composing. Don't worry about the tilt. Just learn, get used to the focus. The focus is very easy with this lens. You're going to see it pretty, you know, right away. Just get used to it. Get used to using those macro filters and getting used to the distance that you need to be in certain situations. And then after you feel comfortable with it, then you can start the tilt. I just want to point out one thing about this dahlia in the upper left. I think it's really interesting how beautifully this lens, with that shallow depth of field, just caught the purple tips in focus. That's what I love about that image, is that it's just the purple that really pops. So that's part of the challenge and the fun of using this lens is trying to make it work with your subjects. So here the lens is slightly tilted to the right. Now what I find, this is a great tip to remember for both this lens and for the Composer, which we're going to talk about next, which is also a tilting lens, is go into your menu, and you may already automatically have this set up, but go into your menu and set your viewfinder to have that rule of thirds grid in there. I find that really helpful for guiding me for when I'm composing my subject and trying to figure out exactly where I need to tilt. I look at that rule of thirds grid and I say, oh, okay, I need to just tilt straight to the right or straight to the left or straight up, or maybe I need to go to the corner. It just provides a visual guide that will help you tilt more effectively. So I love having that little reminder in there, that visual guide. In this case, I'm tilting straight up to get the center of that clematis in focus. So the beautiful blur, you've seen both of these images before, but this, you know, again, it just creates so much emotion and impact. And this is why I love this lens so much. This was captured in my neighborhood during the pandemic. You know, I was missing all the tulips at Chicago Botanic Garden, but I was determined to find them in my neighborhood, and I did. This was in a public park not far from my home. So again, shot with the Sol 45. So that shallow depth of field really pushes your creativity to see how little you can have in focus. Here, it's just the edge of that tulip. It's just a sliver of focus. But that's what I find so exciting about this lens. And it creates literally the most stunning backgrounds straight out of camera. Each of these images those backgrounds have not been touched. That's exactly the way they were shot. Now, I want to qualify this by saying that I don't want to lead you to believe that buying these lenses is going to solve all your background problems, because it's much more complex than that. We need to really pay attention to our backgrounds. It's one of the most important parts of flower photography. You need to be checking every part, every corner of your frame to make sure that your background is not pulling the eye away from your subject, that it's not distracting. And that takes some skill and some practice. I love teaching people about how to control their backgrounds. So it's partly positioning yourself, finding the best possible background. I kind of dance around with my camera before I make that decision. What's going to give me the most beautiful background without distractions of stems, of spots of light, or, you know, other flowers interfering. And sometimes that's really hard. It's I think one of the hardest parts of flower photography. Your aperture has a lot to do with it. Of course, the lower the aperture, the more blur you're going to get in your background. The further away your background is, the more blur you're going to get. And that was partly what happened in all three of these images. And then, of course, the lens that you're using. So oftentimes I reach for this lens because I know that it's going to help me control backgrounds. And I also feel that way about the velvets too. They create beautiful, all the Lensbabies too. You can't single out just one, but this one, I think there's something special about those backgrounds. These are all some fall into winter images that I've created with that lens. And just that wonderful shallow depth of field. But you can get quite a bit in focus, as you see in that dahlia, just by positioning yourself to get that focal plane in focus. All right, now we're going to move on to the Composer Pro 2 with the optic swap system. So what you see on the left is the housing with a Suite 50 inserted. So this is a hollow housing. It works on a ball and socket. It tilts. It's a much more severe tilt than the gentle tilt of the Sol. So it's a little more difficult to master, but don't give up. I promise you, you will get this. I've heard so many people say, oh, I sold my Composer. I couldn't get it. And I'm like, why didn't you email me? I could have helped you. There's so many tips that I have to help with this lens. But you can swap out a whole variety of optics to use in this system, and that makes it really fun. And all the optics are slightly different. The Suite optics, the Suite 35, the Suite 50, the Suite 80 will give you a sweet spot of focus surrounded by beautiful, gorgeous blur. The Twist 60 will give you a twisty blur around your edges and a slight vignette. The Edge optics, which Laura, if you have questions about these, Laura is the expert. She loves these optics. She's actually the one that kind of turned me on to them. The Edge optics will give you a slice of focus, and depending upon which way you tilt them, it could be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. These are wonderful optics for urban shooting, for landscape. I don't use the Edge optics very much in flower photography. I have, and I would never tell you not to try something, because I think that's part of how we learn, how we are creative. So give it a try, see what you get. I actually have shot flowers with them, but my go-to for flowers are usually the Suite optics. All right, so just like with the Sol 45, if you want to get in close, each of these optics has a different focusing distance, and it's all spelled out on the Lensbaby website if you need that information, or you can email me and I'll send you what the distance is. But you're either going to need the 46 millimeter macro filters, the same ones that you would use with the Sol 45, or what we call macro converters, which are essentially like small extension tubes. These fit into the Composer Pro unit. You can stack them together just like you can stack the filters, and then you click the optic in. Now, just a warning. When you use these optics and you're putting them into your camera, make sure that they are securely in place. Don't flip your camera up to shoot until you know that that optic is really, clicked in, and, just test it. Because my biggest nightmare is an optic falling out on the ground, and it will break. I know several people that this has happened to. I've dropped my macro filters so many times on brick sidewalks and never broken one, but the optics I think are a little easier to break. So be very careful when you're inserting them. Okay, so the sweet optics, which are what I use the most, create a beautiful radiating blur surrounding the sweet spot of focus. You move the spot of focus by tilting the lens. And again, use that grid to help guide you that I talked about, that rule of thirds grid. Lower apertures produce a smaller sweet spot and more blur, and higher apertures give you more area of focus and less blur. So most of these optics have a range of from 2.5 all the way up to f22. So you can get lots of blur, or you can get lots in focus. So they're very versatile, and they create a really unique blur. So a lot of people ask me, well, what's the difference between the Sol blur and the Composer or the Sweet optic blur? The sweet blur has a pulled or radiating quality to it. It's kind of a directional pulled look to it that's very different from that softer, creamier blur, but it's absolutely beautiful. You saw the wedding dress before. That was shot with a Sweet 35 optic and macro converters. Just like with the Sol, start by center composing. Don't worry about the tilt. The tilt will come later. Get used to the lens, get used to focusing it, get used to using those macro converters or those macro filters, and then slowly begin to work with the tilt. There's lots of subjects that you can center compose. Don't let anybody tell you that center composing is a bad thing, because it's not, especially in the flower and plant world. It's a wonderful way to show symmetry. Now here I've tilted just slightly to the right, and you can see how sharp the stamen of that tulip is. These are very sharp optics. This is with the Sweet 80 one. I love this. I love the Sweet optics with roses, because unlike the Sol, where I can just get a little bit in focus, and I have made that. You saw an image with a rose that I dearly love, but with the Sweet optics, because of that range of apertures, I can get a few more of those sensuous curves in focus with that lens. Now here you really see that pulled quality of the blur, and how beautiful it is. Sweet 50. So you can see I use these. I use the Sweet optics a lot for my flower photography, and they're really, really fun. All right, the twist optic. Now this gives you a twisty blur around your edges. This is one that you're going to use straight ahead. You do not bend this optic. Again, I'll never tell you not to try something, but just see what happens. But it really works best when you use it straight ahead. I like this for slightly larger scenes. I don't tend to use this optic for close-up for flowers, but it's really fun for, I use it a lot in the fall for these kind of leaf scenes. Now you can also get this, you see it here on the right as the optic that goes into the Composer Pro, but you can also get it as a standalone lens, but that is only for Canon EF, Nikon F, and Sony E mounts. That's the only, but it works. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So if you already own the Composer, then get the optic. Just remember that you have to use it straight ahead. Now, this optic really works best with full frame. It is really built for full frame cameras. It will work with crop, but just wanted to give you that warning. All right, I just very briefly want to mention the Omni Creative Filter System, because this has just taken the world by storm. It is so popular. People are loving it, and it is such a creative way to play. And you know that's really important to me. So you can buy this in 2 different filter thread sizes. So what it is, it's a system that attaches to the front of your lens, and you can use this for any lens. It doesn't have to be a Lensbaby. You can use this on your traditional lenses. Just make sure that you buy the right filter size. So you attach this step-up ring and then these magnets, and then you can use this whole series of incredible crystals and films and wands and all sorts of things that will create these special effects, rainbow effects, color in your background, you know, slices of light. It's just really fun, and you're never going to get the same effect twice. So it's just all about playing and trying them. I keep them in my pockets and I take them out, and I can't even tell you which ones I've used for which images, but they're really, really fun. And they have color expansion packs where you get all these gel colors that you can attach, extra crystals. There's a flare expansion pack, and the even more crystals in the crystal expansion pack. So there's just unlimited play opportunities with this system. And, you know, it just brings a lot of fun. So here's a few images that I have used these. And again, I can't really tell you which wands I've used or which crystals or what, but they're just really fun to play with, to get streaks of color, interesting effects, and really brings your photography to a whole new playful level. All right, I'm just going to end by telling you some helpful tips with Lensbabies that are absolutely essential. And one is to set your diopter. So what setting your diopter means is you're actually setting the viewfinder to match your eyesight. It's like putting on a pair of glasses. And it's amazing when you're using a manual focus lens. It's really essential. You have to do this. So before you start shooting with that new Lensbaby, go in and set your diopter. You'll be able to figure this out in your camera manual, but you're welcome to take a screenshot of this if this helps. What I do is I turn my camera on, I leave the lens cap on, I press the shutter button halfway while looking through the viewfinder, and you'll see that panel light up with your ISO, your shutter speed, you might have your exposure compensation in there, and just turn that diopter wheel until it gets at its sharpest point. It's very easy. You'll see when it's sharpest. And you do need to adjust this periodically. I sometimes hit the diopter wheel by accident, or when I'm taking my camera out of my bag, I'll throw it off and I'll be shooting with my camera. I say, why is everything blurry today? And then I'll realize I need to reset my diopter. So do it every once in a while. It really helps with these manual focusing. So just a few tips about focusing, because this is probably one of the hardest things about a manual focus lens, is to get used to focusing without autofocus. So as I mentioned before, on the lenses that have a range of apertures, this doesn't pertain to the Sol or the Trio, which I didn't have a chance to talk about today, but that's also a fixed aperture lens. You want to be focusing at that f4, f5.6. It's the easiest aperture to see the focus. You know, think about that glow and that softness that you saw in those images with the Velvet. If you try to focus wide open, it's going to be really hard. So start at f4 and f5.6, and then you can adjust your aperture from there. If you're hand holding, turn that focus ring until the focus appears sharp. And then what I do, I have two little systems that I use. I move my body just slightly in and out and watch my subject come in and out of focus. And often I'm actually taking images. I'm focus bracketing. I'm taking images along the way. But that helps me see, was I really accurate when I was turning that focus ring? Because you'll see it come clearly in and out of focus. Or you can alternatively just make small adjustments to the focus ring and watch it come in and out of focus. Now make sure that you're always watching your shutter speed when you're hand holding and keeping that up so that you're not going to have camera shake. Because if your shutter speed gets down there too low, nothing's going to be in focus. So raise your ISO if you need to, but keep that shutter speed up. Focus bracket. I always tell people, take lots of shots. The more you take, the higher your likelihood of success. Don't go home disappointed. Sometimes when I shoot a subject, I am taking 30, 40, 50 images because I know some of them are going to end up in the trash. They'll be out of focus because I do most of my photography handheld. I don't use a tripod very often. I don't recommend this for everyone. I just really love the freedom of hand holding. And it's pretty easy to do with Lensbabies because I'm shooting in those lower apertures. I have plenty of light entering my camera to counter that camera shake. But if you do need to be on a tripod, that's okay, do it. I would never, ever discourage somebody from using a tripod. In fact, your focusing is going to be very easy. So zoom in with live view, use that same f4, f5.6 to establish that focus, and then go to town. Experiment with that aperture. If you have focus peaking technology in your camera, as many of the mirrorless cameras have, it's going to be a big help with Lensbaby. It was a game changer for me. It's actually one of the reasons I switched to mirrorless. So I tend to shoot with the focus peaking on initially. And what focus peaking means, if you're not familiar with it, is it's a technology that lights up the areas in the viewfinder that are in focus. And it really helps you know if you're in focus. But I will be very honest with you about this, in that when I'm using focus peaking, it does interfere a little bit with that little bit of dance that I'm having with my subject. I want to really just see that subject as it is. So that's why I then will turn it off and just trust my eye and focus with my eye. But the focus peaking helps me have more success. And my success rate really went up with that. But I'm not telling you go out and buy a mirrorless camera, because you can do this with any, I mean, the focusing, you just need to practice. It will get easier with time, I promise you. And experiment with aperture. Don't limit yourself. Shoot in a range of apertures to ensure that you get the effect that you want. Some subjects are going to work well with a lot of glow, a lot of blur and softness, but others might be more successful with more focus. Experiment. And another little helpful thing that I didn't know this for a few years when I was using Lensbabies is that you can set the aperture between the stops. Because, you know, you're not dependent on your camera setting that aperture, you're doing it on the ring. So it doesn't have to be right at that f4 or that f2.8. You can go right in between and have something equivalent to f3.5 or f3.2. So that's a handy little thing. Sometimes I find that just that little bit of difference makes the difference in my vision of what I want to capture. So I want to end with just a couple of thoughts, and that is, find joy and be playful. If we have learned anything from this pandemic, it is that life is short and precious, and we need to enjoy what we are doing. We need to shoot what we love and in a way that makes us happy. So don't worry about pleasing everyone. Not everyone's going to like your work. But if you bring your authentic self, if you bring your heart, if you bring that joy into your photography, chances are people are going to respond to your work. So all of these images represent joy to me. And be playful. Be that 3-year-old child that I mentioned early that's at the peak of creativity. Play. tinker, try new things. Don't be afraid of mistakes. We can learn so much by watching young children play because they are at their creative peak. So be playful. This is so important to our creativity. And photograph from your heart. So stay inspired. And I hope you can see my little heart in the center of that dahlia. When I first looked through the lens and I saw that rainbow of color, I was like, whoa. And then the heart appeared. And I knew that's what I wanted to focus on. This is another Sol 45 image. All right, this is my ebook, which is available on visualwilderness.com. It's also linked on my website, which is annebelmontphotography.com. And this is a book about Lensbabies and flower photography. I give you a lot of tips, a lot about my philosophy of shooting flowers and how to shoot with these lenses. I give you all my secrets, all my tips. I have no secrets. I will share everything with you because I love teaching others to love these lenses the way that I love them. So this book, you know, you may find helpful in your journey with Lensbaby. So also, I just want to say thank you for joining me, and I'm always happy to hear from you. This is my email. This is my website. I'm very active on Instagram, a little less so on Facebook, but Instagram I try to post every day, and most of my images are Lensbaby images. Thank you to Lensbaby, and my flower is taking a bow to say thank you. So this has been just really wonderful, and I can't wait to answer your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can get right to that.
I don't even want to jump back in. That was so relaxing and soothing, and I feel like I'm going to totally screw up the vibe here. So let me.
No, dear.
No, thank you. That was beautiful. And if anybody is out there that has a connection to, we got to get you a book. You need a coffee table book. Well, forget the ebooks. Forget the ebooks. Those are images that need to be printed and held on some nice soft rag paper.
You're so sweet. Well,
beautiful stuff.
I've been a little stuck in all that process during COVID. I love to write. It's actually a huge part of my creative process. I've always been a writer, and I write lots of articles for Visual Wilderness. If you go to Visual Wilderness, not only will you find my book, but you'll find a whole wealth of articles on flower photography, on Lensbaby, on macro photography. But for over a year, I've been working on my second book, which is kind of a general look at flower photography and just really going into depth. It's going to be a big book. But hopefully I'm going to get back to it this winter. It's been a really crazy year and actually a really busy year. I've been doing, this is my third webinar this week.
Wow.
But my friend that I mentioned earlier that has the Dahlia Garden, Karen, one of the things that we want to collaborate on, we just have become these amazing friends. And, she loves growing flowers. I love photographing them. I'm teaching her how to photograph flowers, but we have dreams of making a book together. So
awesome. Hey, you have my endorsement. I know Courtney from my team, she does sell prints. I was already on the website. So if you guys, anybody out there interested in prints, I mean, these are beautiful. If I had nice walls to put them on, sure. I don't know.
That really means a lot to me.
No, it really is beautiful work. I'm not even lying. I was so relaxed. I'm like, I don't want to stop. I got to work until 6, so you just keep going and going and going. But let's get into some questions. We had one recurring question that people were asking about, and before we get into questions, I want to give Laura Laura, you get the on-camera round of applause there. She has been going hard in the questions. She has been killing it throughout the last hour and change answering questions. So
I can only imagine. I love Laura. And, we were supposed to be together this summer in August for a conference that out of Chicago does, our Flower and Garden Conference. And that was one of the reasons I was so sad it was postponed, because I didn't get to see Laura this year, but she's fantastic. So thank you, Laura.
So everyone wants to know tripods. Do you use tripods in your work? Or a lot of the places, there was a couple of questions that kept coming up about whether tripods are allowed in certain gardens or not. And then people were also asking about flash, whether you use any flash in your photography or whether it's all
Well,
natural and available light.
really, really, really good questions. And I always get these questions. So I I try to get away without a tripod because I just love the freedom of shooting a handheld. It's just, it, I hope this came across in my presentation, but I'll reiterate it again. The process of photographing to me is actually more important than the image I create. The image just really represents what it felt like to be in, like I talked about that fern, what it feels like to be in that fern room. But it's actually the process that is just so important to me. And so I want to enjoy that process. And for me, that freedom, I love getting in really strange positions. And, with macro photography, you kind of have to. Now, I do know my limits. And there are times, especially in lower light, if I'm shooting indoors in conservatories or like in an orchid show where they might have photographers' hours and you can shoot with a tripod, then yes, absolutely, I need to be on a tripod. So, my advice to people is, do what works best for you and for what gives you the most success, because that's really important. And, many of my students say, I just can't do it without a tripod. And that's fine. That's what you should be using, a tripod. But I also encourage people when they're trying Lensbabies, after they've kind of gotten the feel for it, is just step away from your tripod and see what happens. Because with more light hitting your sensor, because you're using those lower apertures, oftentimes you'd be surprised how high your shutter speed is and how you can shoot without a tripod. I had a student who for years said to me, can't do it, I have to be on a tripod. And finally, just recently, I ran into her at the garden. We were doing a little socially distanced shoot. And she said, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try shooting without a tripod and see what happens. And she was so delighted because it worked for her. So try it and see. And if it doesn't, then go back to your tripod. You should do what works best for you. My method may not work. So the second question about flash. No, I'm not. I'm a natural light shooter. I love natural light. I have occasionally used a ring flash in very specific situations. I was commissioned to do a huge exhibit for Chicago Botanic Garden of my orchid photography. You'll see it on my website. And I was shooting orchids literally for about 2 years straight. And there were certain situations in an orchid exhibit where you have really poor lighting, and there's no way you can do it, first of all, without a tripod and without some external light. So I had mixed results, but I did get some images that I really liked with a ring flash. So, it's a possibility. Lots of people love using flash. So it's really what fits your style. I love, for me, the process of being outdoors in nature, which to me is very therapeutic, and shooting a natural light is just a huge part of what I do. So.
Perfect. Now we had a question, if you could only use one Lensbaby rest of your
Oh,
life, you're stuck with just one, what
oh.
would be your go-to?
That's like asking me to pick my favorite child. I have three. I love them all. I've asked myself that question. I think for me personally, and again, I shoot full frame. I think the Velvet 85 would be the lens that I could not live without. But as you probably picked up, that Sol 45 comes very close. So I hope I never have to make that, I hope that's never an option for me, because that would be really hard. But yeah, the Velvet, I love all the Velvets, but the Velvet 85 is the lens I probably use the most. So.
All right. So we'll never hold you to it. So you don't have to worry about us on our end. Now we did have a couple hellos. Martha says hello. Martha says she gets together with you every couple years, and you guys hit up a garden together. And Darcy says hello. Nice to see you again. Now Darcy is asking if you could remind her where the fern room is, and if the fern room does allow use of a tripod.
Okay, so the Fern Room is at Garfield Park Conservatory. It's just west of the downtown area of Chicago, and I have a just a wonderful connection with this place. I know many of the horticulturists. I spend a lot of time there in the winter usually, but also in the summer. They have a beautiful water lily pond. But of course, this year everything's crazy. I mean, they're pretty much closed down right now. We're going back into lockdown again here in Chicago. It's bad, but so the Fern Room is one of many rooms at Garfield, and there's the Desert House. They have a flower show room where they have their flower shows. There's a tropical room. It's just, I mean, I spend a whole day there photographing. But the Fern Room is really one of my favorites. I love ferns.
Awesome. Now we
go there with me sometime after COVID. We'll meet.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Make some tentative plans going forward.
Yeah.
Now, before we get to our final question, which is one that I wanted to know as well, I do want to remind everybody that we do have the promo code that we did enter into the chat there. So definitely check that out. And it is good for 24 hours. And I know someone's going to ask, well, is it 24 hours from the start or 24 hours from right now? Don't waste precious time. Go. This is the perfect creative boost for everyone who's been sitting around for the last 8-9 months. Like, oh, I'm so bored with everything I do.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Perfect opportunity. Now, Denora is asking, and that is through the B&H website only, just to clarify. So if you go through the B&H website, and you'll notice when you go on there is already sales in place on these items. So that is on top of, is an additional 10% off of that sales price. And that is promo code FLOWER, and the end date is 24 hours. Now, Denora on Facebook had asked the same thing that I wanted to know. So Denora has several Lensbabies.
Okay.
And wants to know, she's afraid to use them. So for those people who are looking and they're like, everybody's probably sitting there like me, and it's like, well, yeah, Anne makes it look so great. If I tried to take the same picture, it would look horrible. How do you get in? I mean, for me, I consider it like painting or drawing, where anybody who's ever painted or drawn, 85% of the way through your picture, it looks like, what am I doing? Nothing makes sense. And it all seems to come together in like the last 10% of that image. So for me, I would think that when you put a lens on like this, that is so foreign to what most people do. Most people work in trying to get the image sharp and not playing with the out of focus areas as much. What advice do you have for people who want to get started, and not only want to get started, but their first 10, 15, 2,000 images might be like, I don't know where to go with this. Do you have any advice for people just starting out?
Absolutely. That is the best possible question. Thank you. I love that question because, yeah, I hear this all the time. You have to realize that when you look at my work, you're seeing my best work. You're not seeing all the mistakes. You're not seeing my Lightroom catalogs with lots of unfocused images, and which I need to clean out. I've been doing this for a long time. And I practice constantly. I'm out in the field almost every day during the growing season. And during the winter, I try to shoot every day too. I just, this is what I love to do. So, I have a lot of time. Remember when I talked about how creativity takes time? It takes a lot of experimentation, it takes a lot of play. That's what you need to get out and do. You just need to get out and practice, try different things. You're going to make lots of mistakes. You're going to have lots of lousy images. I still get lousy images, but just keep trying. And if you're really frustrated, please email me. I will walk you through it. I'll give you every tip I can possibly give you. I can even hop on Zoom with you and, just please don't give up, because this takes practice. I really look at photography, I look at life as a journey that, you know, we have to start somewhere. I should have shown you my first flower image that was taken many, many, many years ago. It was horrible. I had no idea what I was doing. And I've been photographing all my life, but I had never done macro photography. And I wasn't really into flower photography until I moved to Chicago and discovered the Chicago Botanic Garden right at my, you know, fingertips. But it just takes lots of practice. It's not going to come overnight. You're going to have lots of misses, lots of mistakes. Just be patient with yourself, because that journey takes time. But
That's the perfect advice to go out on, I swear. Anne, I wish there were more Annes floating around. It's like
oh,
we need that kind of positivity, that kind of encouragement. And I will say, and as the youngins say on Instagram, don't at me. This is the best use I've seen of a Lensbaby lens. I was completely captivated by your images. I'm not just saying that because I'm on with you right now. I was looking at your images and I was trying not to like, because I knew I was still on camera. So I'm like trying not to like get all up in my screen, and
oh.
beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. I have not seen anybody master the lenses like that. No disrespect to my dear friend Alan Lugo, who loves him some Lensbaby lenses, but Alan, not even in the same league.
Oh. Well, thank you. I am deeply touched by that. But, you know, I really firmly believe that it's because it comes from my heart. And, you know, I think that if, as I said at the very beginning and reiterated over and over again, I think once we can really connect with that part of ourselves and start shooting what brings us joy, what we love, then it all kind of comes together. So, you know, take your time, really stop and think about, you know, what do I love about this subject? What do I want to bring to other people's eyes? That's, you know, I have a whole fieldwork process that I go through when I start with my subject. And the first question I ask is, what am I feeling here? What's attracting me to this subject? And that's part of that slow, mindful approach. But when you bring your heart into it, then I do think people respond to it. So, but thank you. You've made my day, my week, my year.
Wonderful.
This is
No wonder my images are cold heart, cold images. I got to put more heart into it. So,
no, but no, seriously. And you know, I really appreciate that, because I'm trying to approach what we're going through this last 8 months by finding the joys, the little things. When people say things like this is, you know, why you want to keep going. So
yeah, this is what it's about. I mean, the idea is not so much to teach, but rather inspire people and encourage people to find their own reason. You know, you found your reason of why you do it. You found your motivating factor behind how you do it, and you put that into your work, and it's very apparent. And if one or five or 10 people can leave this and say, you know what, wow, like I want to start shooting more with the heart rather than worrying about what anybody else is posting or worrying about how sharp my edges are. I mean, it's really just about creating work that you feel good about.
right, exactly.
See, you taught me. I
Aw,
turned from solid stone to I'm starting to feel
no,
little softness over here.
Derek, I just met you for real today. I mean, I've been watching you for a while, but I don't believe that for a minute. You're just a really warm, amazing person, and
Well,
um,
thank you.
so
No, but
you got.
hey, and look, I'm gonna be pressing you. Don't think I'm just gonna disappear and fall off the map. I'm gonna be looking for that coffee table book. So I know 2020 and 2021 are a little up in the air, but I might pop up in 2023 and be like, come on, where is it?
Okay.
So, and I can't thank you enough, Laura. I know you're hiding back there, busy on the keyboard, but thank you so much again, Lensbaby. Just a wonderful, wonderful, inspiring presentation. Whoever our next event space is that's starting, it's actually, we don't have another one until Monday, so be glad that person doesn't have to follow this up. It would
Oh,
have been like, this is
no.
the goosebumps hour. So And thank you so much again for your your compassion, your heart, your wonderful imagery.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was a pleasure to do, a pleasure to work with all of you at B&H. Just really super experience. So I'd love to come back again.
There you go. Well, hey, look, this is what we'll do. Once everything clears up, Bronx, the New York Botanical Garden, right up the street from me in the Bronx. We'll come down. Hopefully, we'll get some photo walks going back sooner rather than later. There we go. Anne Belmont photo walk with Lensbaby up at the New
Oh,
York Botanical Garden.
that would be awesome. I would.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Let's make it happen. There. We
All
got it all set.
right.
We already got the plans drawn out, the blueprints ready. But and huge thank you to you, Laura, and the rest of the Lensbaby crew. Thank you to my team. Thank you, and to all of our wonderful viewers who are still sticking with us through all of my mindless banter. I thank you humbly. But that has been another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll catch you all next time.